Dylan.
And I'm Kiyan.
And this is a little retrospective on Susan. So Susan was stranded on Earth by the first Doctor.
Well, that's putting it a little harshly.
Well, I mean, that's what happened.
I guess. I mean, it's not like she was unwilling.
I mean, that's not to say it was the wrong thing to do. I think she wouldn't have done it herself if the first Doctor hadn't. I mean, he realized that...
He prompted her to do it.
Yeah, well, he realized that she wanted to settle down, and so he made her settle down. I mean, albeit a little forcefully, but still.
Yeah, still one of the best, I don't want to say monologues because the show doesn't really have many monologues, but still one of the best quotes, I guess, in the show so far. Speeches. That's putting it a little unfairly because there haven't been many speeches, but as far as quotes go...
It is one of the best written lines in the show so far.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, up there with the likes of dinner tonight will be a national disaster, according to you at least.
Hate that quote.
I do. But I was actually going to say up there with like the second Doctor's, while you've been content merely to observe, I stop evil, however he worded it. Once again, much more eloquently than I could paraphrase it.
Right, but yeah, you know, even looking back, it's still quite memorable, and you know, that might lead us into saying, well, you know, we're doing this look back now because we have, you know, more perspective now and slightly better at talking about the show.
Yeah, but also our original one, as is with all of the retrospectives, was pretty much on the spot, as is the whole show. If you didn't realize, we do improvise most of the show. But obviously now it's been nearly a year at this point that she got written out in terms of our podcast.
Yeah, I think just about a year. A little under a year.
I mean, we're not going to wait a year to do a retrospective for everyone, but it just so happens that that's how it worked out. I mean, we've seen a lot more of the show now, and I think we have a couple more things to say in how Susan set up the whole companion role and what she did as a companion and how she worked with the Doctor. We should transition into her tenure on the show in that she was the first companion. Her first appearance was an unearthly child, the very first serial.
Right. If you want to go into expanded universe stuff, she started being a companion of the Doctor before the show even started, technically.
There's prose and audio dramas detailing their escapades before they landed in a junkyard in, you know, Totter's Lane. And then, you know, that speech obviously was from the Dalek invasion of Earth, which was her final outing on the show.
Right.
As a regular companion.
Yeah. She definitely appears later and in expanded universe stuff, like we say, like audio dramas, novels.
Yeah.
But on the show, she left in second serial of season 2.
Right.
So that was, I believe,
if I remember correctly, it was 10 serials.
10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, it was 10. 51 episodes, I think. 51 episodes of 10 serials.
So yeah, pretty long run. The earlier companions definitely, even compared to where we are now, which isn't in respect to how long the show is, isn't much farther than where we were before.
Right.
The companions, you know, during the third and somewhat second Doctor's run, don't have such long tenures as the ones in the first Doctor's run did.
I mean, even in the reboot, speaking from watching the reboot, most companions in the reboot stay on for about 1 season. There are exceptions, of course. A couple of them stayed on for 2.5. The current companion has been on for 1.5 already, and we're going to see how long she lasts. But of course, the reboot is different since it's not serialized, so 1 season of 12 episodes, whereas like Susan appeared in 1 season of, 3, 6, 7, 8 serials, which is in itself like 46 episodes.
Yeah. And obviously part of it is just how the show was. You know, they didn't know if they were going to get renewed, so why write out these characters?
Yeah.
You know, if season 2 is happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously a TV program slightly different than like a novel or a movie where you want to leave it open to the potential for more. Um,
Well, I mean, I think they kind of did that. I mean, the Doctor's speech mentions that he'll come back at some point for Susan, which I don't know the plot of the Five Doctors, but I mean, he does at some point meet up with her again,
mhm.
if not in the Five Doctors and audio and novels in the future. In respect to Susan, that is, where he shows up again and it's like, "Hey, how's it going?"
But yeah, no. Now that you mention it, I suppose they do leave it open for her to come back potentially, which I guess leads us into the fact that she left was due to her actress Carol Ann Ford wanting to leave.
Yeah, I think that was the case with a lot of the write-outs of the show, just in general. Just an actor kind of being tired of the show, especially in the
Probably,
early run when it was really intensive, where they were basically filming the whole year round.
probably, yeah. Um, Surprisingly enough, they sort of got worse with companion write-outs as time went on. Even though some of the more recent companion write-outs that we've watched were, I don't want to say conclusively not because the actor wanted to leave, but it seemed like it was more due to plot rather than behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, despite the fact that this was just Carol Ann Ford saying, "Hey guys, I don't want to be on the show anymore," Susan was still given the best write out of any companion. Well,
excepting maybe Jamie and Zoe,
yeah,
which I think we mentioned in the episode we recorded for them, as in the regular podcast episode.
yeah.
And that retrospective will show up on this channel at some point in its own form, but until then, you'll have to wait. But yeah, I think she definitely got the best write out of the first Doctor's companions conclusively.
Easily.
It was a bit
More
abrupt,
so
I guess.
than like Vicky or someone like that.
Well, Vicky just. But how did Vicky even get written out?
She
Oh, right,
fell in
she
love with
married that guy, which is basically just
what's
a
his
rehash
name?
of the Susan write out, but worse.
Yeah, because at least Susan's write out had something leading up to it. She didn't want to travel with the Doctor anymore. Didn't want to. Well, this might be, ironic to say this, but she didn't want to quote unquote be tied down to traveling through time and space.
Right. I know what you're saying.
I don't know how else to phrase it, but
yeah, she didn't want to be trapped into always living on the TARDIS with the Doctor, even though the Doctor was her grandfather, and she loved him obviously because of that. But yeah, they did mention it briefly in passing in a couple serials that she wanted to like settle down and stay in one location. But it still
Right.
felt kind of abrupt when it happened. I mean, I don't know if that was just a product of him locking her out and being so abrasive about being abrasive about going about it, but even though like I said, they did lead up to it sort of, it was a bit abrupt.
Well, it was definitely telegraphed in season 1. So even back then, potentially even if Carol Ann Ford weren't going to leave the show, maybe they were leading up to something with that anyway. I don't know, and I don't think there's any way to possibly know unless I can find an interview about it or something.
Yeah.
But I guess it did feel abrupt, but not so much as other companions write-outs have.
Yeah. Because she had that mentioning of it leading up to wanting to settle down somewhere and stop traveling type thing.
And, also, I remember way back in the beginning of season 1, we mentioned that, either Susan doesn't do anything in the serial or Barbara doesn't. It's one or the other. And, in the later serials, they evened it out a little more and had Susan doing a little more.
I think even though they kind of fell into that one of them does something and one of them doesn't, I think they did a good job of developing Susan as her own character separate from Barbara, and they didn't both fall into the useless woman role. They definitely developed the whole Susan is the Doctor's granddaughter and they have some sort of relationship because of that type thing, whereas Barbara was developed into being, that whole school teacher vibe was elaborated on. So the characters were separate, even if they both ended up not doing something over the course of their run at some point.
Right. Well, I mean, even in the beginning, like Ian and Barbara's characters were slightly telegraphed as the same thing.
Right.
Not too much, because that was like one episode where you're like, okay, Ian and Barbara are one unit. But yeah, they definitely differentiated them better as time went on. It was really only in the beginning of season 1, looking back, that complaint has that complaint is viable.
Right.
And I guess we actually do have more perspective on it now. Or maybe we just forgot.
It was, like we said, almost a year ago now that she got written out, so...
To us, at least.
Yeah, right.
It's like 50 years ago.
That's true, yeah. Well, this would have been, actually 50. Close to. Yeah. I don't know. Susan, I think she did a good job of setting up the companion role, though. Like, as the first companion, I think it was a good choice to have her related to the Doctor.
Well, she was also set up as a character who the Doctor could talk to about things without, how do I say this? I'm phrasing this terribly. The Doctor...
I think what you're trying to say is that someone he could talk to about things that, like...
Ian and Barbara wouldn't understand.
Yeah, because they're from a different time and a different place than the Doctor and Susan are.
Exactly.
Which, yeah, is true. I think he doesn't really find anyone else like that until maybe Zoe, because she's an astrophysicist who has the brain the size of a mountain or something.
And maybe you could consider Jamie as that too. Like, after he'd been on the TARDIS for a while, he like knew a lot about maybe not time travel or science or anything, but the TARDIS itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they set it up well in that, it was the Doctor and Susan who knew about, like the adventures they were going on in time travel in the TARDIS, and then Ian and Barbara were the more relatable characters because they're from Earth.
Yeah. I think that was a good choice. Well, like I said.
To set up the show, at least.
Yeah. It would be difficult to say that that's a good choice now if someone just showed up in the middle of, like, the third Doctor's run and was like, hey, I'm your long-lost brother, I'm going to travel with you. Or sister, or cousin. It's like, yeah, I'm going to travel with you now. That would be kind of weird.
And whatever family member he had that would do that would probably be ostracized by their entire planet.
Yeah, that's true. She was a companion of her time and wouldn't really work anywhere else.
Oh, are we mentioning her birth name?
Oh, I guess we can.
I just learned this today. Apparently was Archeator.
Yeah, it was mentioned in some prose somewhere, and I feel like apparently that means Rose in Gallifreyan, and I think they only did that to tie her in with the first companion of the reboot, who's named Rose.
Huh.
But I don't know.
That's
I guess
interesting.
It's cool. Apparently, the novelizations also refer to her as Susan English, even though on screen her name was referred to as Susan Foreman.
That might just be a continuity thing.
Yeah,
potentially.
No one really knows why the guy who novelized the serials wrote it Susan English, but it is kind of just an adopted name anyway, so whether it's Foreman or English doesn't really matter since it's not a real name.
Well, technically Susan isn't a real name either.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's an adopted name.
Yeah, they should have just called her Archeator.
They hadn't come up with that when the show aired.
They should have come up with it.
Well, I think we all know that the Doctor probably isn't the Doctor's real name either. I mean...
No, it is. No, I don't know.
There's no conclusive evidence that it is and isn't, is what I'm saying, so we don't really know if it is. Although I think we can assume it isn't, but who knows?
That's not the point.
Doctor Who. But yeah, Susan... I liked Susan, not as much as Ian, because Ian is my favorite companion until Jamie came along, but, she was a good setup. That's all I have to say about her.
Yeah, I don't think I'd even put her in my favorite First Doctor companions, but she did what she had to.
Yeah, the First Doctor had a lot of charismatic charismatic companions who all had very distinct personalities. So it's hard to choose one favorite because they were all really unique, even though
Well,
some of them did get terrible red-outs. And
Susan
I'm
and
excluding Dodo.
Vicky were kind of the same character.
Yeah, well, that's because when Susan left, they're like, hey, we need to replace that whole teenager vibe, so let's get Vicky.
Yeah, that's true.
Which just goes to show how good of a character Susan was, that they felt they needed to choose someone exactly like Susan to replace her.
I guess, yeah, and I mean, potentially it was the fact that they just didn't want to write her out at that point.
Yeah, that
Sort of
too.
like, your new Susan.
New Susan.
They should have just called her New Susan.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah, I think that wraps up our little retrospective on Susan.
Yep.
Covers everything we wanted to cover. So, yes, check us out on iTunes for our regular podcast, and check out the website for any other cool content, and make sure to keep watching the YouTube channel for any other exclusive video content that may show up. Spooky.
Yep, and definitely check us out on Facebook, like us on Facebook. But yeah, so there may be more exclusive content coming up, maybe something else having to do with companions like this. The end.